If you're anything like me, you're looking for passive income, and my strategy is to use weekly and monthly high-paying ETFs to create an income stream that I don't have to babysit. I'm going to go over last week's results and where the account stands in my experiment to use margin and high-yield ETFs to create a safe and consistent revenue stream. Let's get started. After a rough week in the markets, my account settled at $2,228. And this number represents the value of all the assets that I own outright, primarily my shares in PAAA, which are my foundation fund, and combine that with the losses that I have so far in the margin account. Let's take a look at my margin health. I'm still in the low risk category, about $219, or about 9.9% above my maintenance threshold. This is the first time in many weeks that I've dropped below the 10% level. If it drops down to the 5% level, it's considered high risk. Once that percentage turns negative, I'm at risk of a margin call, and that's happened a couple of times in this experiment. This is what a margin warning looks like on Robinhood. I definitely don't want to see these. Let's take a look at the week. And we'll see that overall down 2.09%, but a lot of that was buoyed by PAAA. PAAA represents the largest amount of my portfolio, and for the week, it was actually up a hair, even though a lot of stocks were down. And this is what I want this fund to do. It's not a super high yielder. It's generally between 4 and 5%, but it really helps me keep my account balance above the $2,000 margin minimum, so I can avoid a margin call. I have videos on that. Check the playlist if you want to see more about my margin troubles. But right now, we're in okay shape. Back on the Robinhood Legend screen, I wanted to take a look at the average price that I've paid for shares and the most current price. And I've got these columns side by side. So you can see here, CHPY, for example, my average share cost is $58.08, and it's currently trading for over $70. NVII, I have a loss since my average is about $26.47, and it's trading for a little over $24. BLOX is the worst off at the moment. My average is $16.63, and it's trading for $12.88. This high-yield ETF has had a rough couple of weeks. The current price of SPYI at $53.23 is above my $51.41 average share price. And PAAA bounces around a little bit. Next time it pays out a dividend, it'll probably drop below my average price and then work its way back up. Here's a price return chart for the last week, July 13th through 17th. BLOX was down over 7.5%. CHPY was down almost 7%. NVII was down a little more than 1%. Here I've added the Qs and SPY for context. QQQ was down over 2.3%, and SPY was down about 0.75%. Finally, I've added SPYI to the chart, still in the 1 week. Interestingly, it was down only 0.56%, which beats every other ticker on this chart. SPYI is my forever fund, the one that I hope to keep for years or decades. Now let's talk about dividends. NVII paid me 19 cents per share for a total of $1.45 this week. So what do I do with these dividends? Each week I split them in half. 50% gets reinvested back into the fund that produced the dividend. The other 50% gets invested into SPYI. 19 cents a share seemed a little low, and I have all of the weekly dividends recorded on my spreadsheet, but I think it's easier to see in a graph. This is the 6-month dividend amount for NVII, and here we are with the most recent at 19 cents. With that huge spike up in May at 60 cents per share, we're about back where we started. 6 months ago in January, the dividend was 20 cents per share. The dividend amount varies a lot, but it looks like a little more ups than downs. BLOX paid me a little under 10 cents per share this week for a grand total of 92 cents. I had 51 cents left over from last week, still ready to invest. But because 50% of the dividend of this week was so small, I still don't even have $1. So I'll have to wait until next week's dividend comes through to add it to the past 2 weeks to reinvest back into BLOX. Crossing below the 10 cent per share threshold also made me curious. So let's take a look at the dividend amount that BLOX has paid out over the last 6 months. Here we are at a little under 10 cents. You can see that it's been below that, a 9.3 cent and an 8.9 cent, another 9.8 cent back in March and early April. This graph isn't great, but I understand that all of the underlying holdings for BLOX, which is invested in the cryptocurrency world, have been under a lot of pressure recently. In this view, I've added the price to the graph, and you can see that the dividend tracks right along with the share price. This fund aims to pay out 36%, so that's what we'd expect. I do have confidence that once Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency stocks make a turnaround, the value of BLOX will go up substantially. as well as the dividend amount. Moving over to CHPY, I was paid about 59 cents per share for a total of $1.77. Those dividends were split in half and reinvested. Here's a look at the CHPY dividend over the last 6 months. It's been on a pretty nice upward trend until recently, as the entire semiconductor sector has experienced a lot of profit taking and share price declines. Again, I've added the price return to this chart, where you can see that recently the share price has gone down, and with it, the dividend. My total return summary looks worse this week than last week. CHPY has been on that downward trend we talked about, and that position has moved from the green into the red. BLOX is really suffering, and that combined position that was formerly COIW, HOOW, and MSTY have really cratered, down significantly. But like I mentioned earlier, I do think BLOX can come back. It just needs Bitcoin and related stocks to turn around, and I'm hopeful by the end of this year that will start happening. NVII has drifted down a little bit too, but I think that can recover. I had to double check the math on this exact $250 value for SPYI, but it's correct. The Google spreadsheet I'm using automatically pulls the closing price from the last day. It does not include after hours fluctuations. And the closing price on Friday afternoon multiplied by my number of shares does actually equal exactly $250, which is 25% of the way to my goal of $1,000 in SPYI. Once I reach that milestone, I'll use all of the dividends to pay down the margin balance. And once that's done, I'd have $1,000 of SPYI for free, because I'm not paying any interest on that initial $1,000 margin loan as a Robinhood Gold member. So overall, the portfolio is down about 23%, not including the shares of PAAA. Since SPYI has reached that 25% milestone, I decided to take a quick look at my purchase log. This is a summary of the purchases I've made from using 50% of the high-yield ETFs, as well as the SPYI dividends being reinvested back into itself. And it's kind of interesting to see. You can see my first purchase was on July 30th of 2025, so we're approaching 1 year. My second one was huge, $10.65. And you can just see I've made a ton of micro purchases over the months, approximately 75 total, bringing my share count up to a little over 4.7. SPYI is currently trading for around $53 a share. My initial purchases were around $51 a share. This ETF is currently paying about a 12% distribution rate, and I do own this stock in another account in a much larger quantity. In fact, I actually own a good number of the NEOS ETFs. I also own a good number of ETFs from other fund families, as I like to diversify both the underlying holdings as well as the strategies. NEOS writes monthly calls, but other funds do 0 DTE or weekly calls, and I think it's healthy to have a mix. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like and subscribe so I know that you're out there. And remember, nothing I said here today is financial, investing, or any other type of advice. You should always consult a professional if you're not sure. Good luck hunting those infinite dividends. Take care.